Recently, I've been thinking about poverty, but not the typical kind, the internal kind. Poverty of the soul. True impoverishment is internal impoverishment. The soul that's been created but hasn't yet realized why. The heart that still beats but has already died. Few people would ever want to fall, and no one likes to drown. Yet in struggling through this life, sometimes it's so hard not to let the world in. Sometimes the ocean of dunya enters our hearts, and just like the ocean that enters the boat, it shatters our hearts, it breaks our hearts, it owns our hearts. And sometimes we end up at our lowest point, just like at the bottom of the ocean. And when we're there, we feel like it's the end. And that's the thing about the bottom of the ocean, no light enters it. But when you reach that point, you're faced with a choice. You can either stay there until you drown, or you can gather pearls and rise again, becoming stronger from your swim and richer from your jewels. If you seek God, He can rebuild your heart, rebuild that ship. He can transform what was once your greatest weaknesses into your greatest strengths, and can become a means of redemption. Because see, that's the amazing thing about tawbah and turning back to Allah. We're told that it's a polish. So not only does it clean, it actually can make the heart even more beautiful than it was before it got dirty. If you seek God, He can replace the darkness of the ocean with the light of His sun. Yet how can we get there when we're faced and we live in a world that is constantly bombarding us and commanding us to worship other things, to love other things as we should only love God? How can we escape true impoverishment of the soul? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that there are a people who love others as they should only love God. And yet when He describes the believers, He says, and He describes them as ashaddu hubban lillah. In order to escape true impoverishment, we have to be ashaddu hubban lillah, overflowing in our love for Allah. But you can't love something that you don't know, and you can't know something that you never speak to and you never remember. We have to speak to Him, we have to remember Him, and remember Him often. See, many of us believe that all we have to do is live our lives however we want, and then before we die just say La ilaha illallah. But see, the thing is that however we lived is how we will die. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not allow our tongues to say La ilaha illallah at death unless there is La ilaha illallah inside the heart. Unless we put Allah first in our lives, we won't be able to put Allah first in our death. And so in order for us to live a life that is full of the love of God, we need to put God at the center, and we need to not lose hope when we do reach that lowest point. And we ask God throughout our lives that every time we slip, to allow us to come back and to stand back up and to rise. If we do that, then and only then will God allow our tongues at the time of death to say La ilaha illallah. We bear witness that there is absolutely nothing worthy of our ultimate love and worship and devotion except for God. I was home. The semester was over. It was finals week. Frantically, I worked to finish the final pages of my research paper for experimental psychology. The paper was due by 4. It was 3:55. I called my instructor to tell her that I'd be there by 4:20. I was in control. As humans, we always are, even when we aren't. To survive the uncertainty of our lives, we create stories and believe in them as faithfully as a child in the Tooth Fairy. Among the most convincing of these stories is the belief in the omnipotence of human control. We believe, almost as fact, that the world around us is subject to our will and that it is in our control. We believe this because it seems too scary not to. It was 4:05 when I got into my car. It was raining then. I was in a hurry. After dropping off my paper, I had to go see my father in the hospital. We never thought the pain was his heart. For years, he would get those attacks, pain in the middle of his chest that his doctor passed off as asthma. But recently, it had gotten worse. It wasn't unexpected. A lot had changed that year, and if there was one thing my father hated, it was change. He surrounded himself so much with what was familiar, and any threat to it disturbed him. He filled his office with hundreds of pens, unwilling to throw a single one away. By keeping each pen, he maintained his sense of control. But he couldn't control the change that happened around him. That year, my sister got married and my mother moved for work. It was hard on my father, and his heart paid the price. It was 4:10 now, but I wasn't worried. I knew I had enough time before I needed to meet my mother. She was already at the hospital. She would have it no other way. When my mother first heard he was sick, the news so consumed her that she tripped on the stairs and sprained her ankle. Until now, she can't even remember how. That's always how she was. Whenever something was on her mind, she couldn't see the world around her. This time, it was that final stare that she didn't notice. It was just another detail that threatened to disturb the balance and depth of her thoughts. A detail that threatened her sense of control. At the time she heard the news, she was working in New York. It was a job she had worked hard for. But when she found out about my father, a stewardess pushed my mother's wheelchair onto the earliest flight to Wisconsin. She came home that Thursday. The emergency bypass surgery was scheduled first thing Monday morning. The whole thing would be over in a few days. No problem. The doctor was in control. It was 4:12 now, and my younger sister and I were on our way. It was raining more then, so when the light turned yellow, I decided I had plenty of time to get through the signal. But the car in front of me didn't think so. It stopped. It must have been seconds, but took hours. I left my house at 4:05 to be at school by 4:20. My father entered the surgical room on Monday to be out by Friday. We're all in control. We make our plans, we draw them out and fill them in. My car would never make it to campus. My car would never go anywhere again. My father never left the hospital that Friday or the next. My father would not leave the hospital for the next 5 weeks. It was only by the grace of God that he left at all. At 55 miles an hour, I slammed into the car ahead of me. At 48 hours after his surgery, my father had a heart attack and went into heart failure. The car never asked my permission, and neither did his heart. There was nothing either of us could do to control it. It was 5 o'clock. A tow truck dropped me off. I was 45 minutes late and right back where I'd started. I was home. We're home. And then we aren't. Torn away from our origin, we came across time and space to another world, a lesser world. But in that separation, something painful happened. We were no longer with God in the physical space. Unlike our father Adam alayhi salam, we could no longer feel that same peace. And so we came down. We were torn from him. And in the pain of that separation, we bled. For the first time, we bled. And that tearing apart from our Creator left a gash, a deep wound that we are all born with. And as we grew, so did the agony of that wound. It grew deeper and deeper. But as time went on, we moved further and further away from the antidote already in our nature, to be near him, heart, mind, and soul. And with each passing year, we became more and more desperate to fill that empty space. But it is in that quest to fill the emptiness that we stumbled. We all stumbled on different things, and some of us sought to numb that emptiness. So some of humanity stumbled on drugs or alcohol, while some looked to other sedatives. Some of us stumbled on the worship of physical pleasure, status, or money. Some of us lost ourselves in our careers. And then some of us stumbled on people. Some of us lost ourselves there. But what if every single stumble, every challenge, every experience in our life was only intended for one purpose? To bring us back to our origin? What if every win, every loss, every beauty, every fall, every cruelty, and every smile was only intended to unveil another barrier between us and God? Between us and where we began, and where we are desperately seeking to return? What if everything was only about seeing him? We must know that all that we experience in life has a purpose, and it is we who choose whether to realize that purpose or not. Take, for example, beauty. Some people don't even recognize beauty when it's right in front of them. They can walk through a sunset or a brilliant forest of trees and not even notice. Other people see beauty and do appreciate it. They will stop and take it in. They may even feel overwhelmed by it, but it ends there. That person is like the one who appreciates art, but never inquires about the artist. The artwork itself was intended to communicate a message from the artist. But if the art lover loses himself in the painting, but never sees the message, that artwork hasn't fulfilled its true purpose. The purpose of the glorious sun, first fallen snows, crescent moon, and breathtaking ocean is not just to decorate this lonely planet. The purpose is far deeper than that. God tells us in the Quran, indeed in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alteration of night and day are signs for those of understanding. We must study the stars, the trees, the snow-capped mountains in order to read the message behind them. Because if we do not, we are like the one who finds a message inside a beautifully decorated bottle, yet becomes so enamored by the bottle that he never even opens the message. If we look beyond and through everything that happens to us, everything we do or fail to do, and see Allah, then we will have gotten the purpose. When something happens that you love, be careful not to miss the point. Remember that nothing happens without a reason. Seek it out. Look for the purpose Allah created in what He has given to you. What aspect of His essence is He showing you through it? What does He want from you? Similarly, when something happens that you dislike or that hurts you, be careful not to get lost in the illusion created by pain. Look through it. Find the message in the bottle. Find the purpose, and let it lead you to glimpse just a little more of Him. If it's a slip or even a fall in your deen, don't let shaitan deceive you. Let the slip make you witness His mercy in a more experiential and deep way, and then seek that mercy to save you from your sins and your own transgression against yourself. If it's an unavoidable problem, don't despair. Witness a glimpse of Al-Fattah, the one who opens for his slaves anything that's closed. And if it is a storm, don't let yourself drown. Let it bring you to witness how only He can save His servant from a storm when there is no one else around. So on this path back to where we began, who else can we run to? Who else can we seek? After all, we all want the very same thing: to be whole, to be happy, to again say, we're home. When I was 17 years old, I had a dream. I dreamt that I was sitting in a masjid and a little girl walked up to me and asked me a question. She asked me, why do people have to leave each other? The question was a personal one, but it seemed clear why that question was chosen for me. I was one to get attached. Ever since I was a child, this temperament was clear. While other children in preschool could easily recover once their parents left, I could not. My tears, once set into motion, did not stop easily. As I grew up, I learned to become attached to everything around me. From the time I was in the first grade, I needed a best friend. As I got older, any fallout with a friend shattered me. I couldn't let go of anything. People, places, events, photographs, moments, even outcomes became objects of strong attachment. If things didn't work out the way I wanted or imagined, I was devastated. And disappointment for me wasn't an ordinary emotion. It was catastrophic. Once let down, I never fully recovered. I could never forget, and the break never mended. Like a glass vase that you place on the edge of a table, once broken, the pieces never quite fit again. But the problem wasn't with the vase, or even that the vases kept breaking. The problem was that I kept putting them on the edge of tables. Through my attachments, I was dependent on my relationships to fulfill my needs. I allowed those relationships to define my happiness or my sadness, my fulfillment or my emptiness, my security and even my self-worth. And so like the vase placed where it will inevitably fall, through those dependencies, I set myself up for disappointment. I set myself up to be broken. And that's exactly what I found. One disappointment, one break after another. But the people who broke me were not to blame, any more than gravity can be blamed for breaking the vase. We can't blame the laws of physics when a twig snaps because we leaned on it for support. The twig was never created to carry us. There's a crucial lesson in the Quran that there is only one handhold that never breaks. There's only one place where we can lay our dependencies, and only one relationship that should define our self-worth. Only one source from which we should seek our ultimate happiness, fulfillment, and security. That place is God. But this world is all about seeking those things everywhere else. Some of us seek it in our careers, some seek it in wealth, some in status. Some, like me, seek it in our relationships. And that's exactly where I spent much of my own life, seeking a way to fill my inner void. And so it was no wonder that the little girl in my dream asked me this question. It was a question about loss, about disappointment. It was a question about being let down, a question about seeking something and coming back empty-handed. It was about what happens when you try to dig in concrete with your bare hands. Not only do you come back with nothing, you break your fingers in the process. And I learned this not by reading it, not by hearing it from a wise teacher. I learned it by trying it again and again and again. And so the little girl's question was essentially my own question being asked to myself. Ultimately, the question was about the nature of the dunya as a place of fleeting moments and temporary attachments, as a place where people are with you today and leave or die tomorrow. But this reality hurts our very being because it goes against our nature. We as human beings are made to seek, love, and strive for what is perfect and what is permanent. And so we create ageless creams and cosmetic surgery in a desperate attempt to hold on, in a desperate attempt to mold this world into what it is not and will never be. And that's why if we live in dunya with our hearts, it breaks us. That's why this dunya hurts. It is because the definition of dunya as something temporary and imperfect goes against everything we are made to yearn for. And we must also realize that nothing happens without a purpose, nothing, not even broken hearts, not even pain. Pain itself is a pointer to our attachments. That which makes us cry, that which causes us the most pain, is where our false attachments lie. After years of falling into the same pattern of heartbreak and disappointment, I finally began to realize something profound. I had always thought that love of dunya meant being attached to material things, and I was not attached to material things. I was attached to people. I was attached to moments. I was attached to emotions. And so I thought that the love of dunya just didn't apply to me. What I didn't realize was that people, moments, attachments were all part of dunya. What I didn't realize was that all the pain I had experienced in life was due to one thing and one thing only: love of dunya. Looking back at the dream I had when I was 17, I wonder if that little girl was me. I wonder this because the answer that I gave her was a lesson I would need to spend the next painful years of my life learning. My answer to her question of why people have to leave each other was, because this life isn't perfect. For if it was, what would the next be called? When the companion of the Prophet, peace be upon him, entered a town to bring them the message of Islam, he put it very beautifully. He said, "I have come to free you from the slavery of the slave and bring you to the slavery of the Lord of the slave." Within this statement lies a powerful treasure. Locked within these words is the key to empowerment and the only true path to liberation. You see, the moment you and I allow anything other than our Creator to define our success, our failure, our happiness, or our worth, we have entered into a silent but destructive form of slavery. That thing which defines my self-worth, my success, or my failure is what controls me, and it becomes my master. The master which has defined a woman's worth has taken many forms throughout time. One of the most prevalent standards made for women has been the standard of men. But what we so often forget is that God has honored the woman by giving her value in relation to himself, not in relation to men. Yet as some ideologies erased God from the scene, there was no standard left but men. As a result, the woman was forced to find her value in relation to a man, and in so doing, she had accepted a faulty assumption. She had accepted that men are the standard, and thus a woman can never be a full human being until she becomes just like a man, the standard. What she didn't realize was that God dignifies both men and women in their distinctiveness, not in their sameness. When we accept men as the standard, suddenly anything uniquely feminine becomes by definition inferior. Being sensitive is an insult. Becoming a full-time mother, a degradation. In the battle between stoic rationality, considered masculine, and selfless compassion, considered feminine, rationality reigned supreme. But a Muslim woman does not need to degrade herself in this way. She has God as the standard. She has God to give her value. She doesn't need a man to do this. Given our privilege as women, we only degrade ourselves by trying to be something we're not, and in all honesty, don't want to be, a man. As women, we will never reach true liberation until we stop trying to mimic men and value the beauty in our own God-given distinctiveness. And yet in society, there is another prevalent master which has defined for women their worth. And that is the so-called standard of beauty. Since the time we were little, we as women have been taught a very clear message by society. And that message was, be thin, be sexy, be attractive, or be nothing. So we were told to put on their makeup and wear their short skirts, instructed to give our lives, our bodies, our dignity for the cause of being pretty. We came to believe that no matter what we did, we were worthy only to the degree that we could please and be beautiful for men. So we spent our lives on the cover of Cosmo, and we gave our bodies for advertisers to sell. We were slaves, but they taught us that we were free. God says in the Quran, "Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is the one who is the most righteous. So you are honored, but it is not by your relationship to men, either by being them or pleasing them. Your value as a woman is not measured by the size of your waist or the number of followers on Instagram. And so I ask you to unlearn. I ask you to stand up and tell the world that you are a slave to nothing, not to fashion, not to beauty, not to men. You are a slave to God and God alone. I ask you to tell the world that you're not here to please men with your body. You're here to please God. So to those who mean well and wish to liberate you, just smile and say, thanks, but no thanks. Tell them you're not here to be on display, and your body is not for public consumption. Make sure that the world knows that you will never be reduced to an object or a pair of legs to sell shoes. You are a soul, a mind, a servant of God, and your worth is defined by the beauty of that soul, that heart, that moral character. Therefore, in answering the question of where and how a woman can find empowerment, I find myself led back to the statement of our Prophet's companion, that true liberation and empowerment lies only in freeing oneself from all other masters, all other definitions, all other standards. As Muslim women, we have been liberated from this silent bondage. We don't need society's standards of beauty or fashion to define our worth. We don't need to become just like men to be honored. And we don't need to wait for a prince to save or complete us. Our worth, our honor, our salvation, and our completion lie not in the slave, but in the Lord of the slave.